Welcome to the Content Amplified podcast, brought to you by Masset. Our goal is to help you get more from your marketing content. Each episode is a 10 to 15 minute interview with industry experts that share amazing insights to help you squeeze as much juice from your content as you possibly can. Here's today's interview.
Welcome back to another episode of Content Amplified. Today I'm joined by Kelsey. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited too. This is going to be a fun conversation. Kelsey, let's get to know you real quick before we dive in. How did you get into marketing? What do you love about marketing and content? Let's get to know you a little bit.
I actually got into marketing, I guess, in a different route, but I suppose a lot of people get into their careers in a non-traditional way. So I actually never took a single marketing course when I was in college. I went to university for creative writing, and my parents, as I was telling you before, mechanical engineer and paralegal. I think it was certainly a surprise for them, but they were very supportive. And so while I was attending university to get my creative writing degree, I actually had an advisor who initially I was focusing on more like narrative, long form content, short stories, things like that, actually challenge me and say, have you ever considered poetry? Because she noticed my particular love for selecting like just the right word. And I hadn't. And she explained to me how, well, poetry is basically condensing that whole story into its rawest form. And I loved that. Like that really resonated with me. It stuck with me. And I changed to have my focus be in poetry. And it wasn't until after I graduated that I discovered the similarities between poetry and marketing, specifically content marketing, and just, the power of words within marketing, whether it's long form content such as ebooks or blogs or, even social media posts. Like you have limited characters to work with, so you got to make it count. So that was just like a very seamless transition for me once I discovered that link. And I've been in marketing ever since.
Again, I think there's so many cool pathways into marketing, and I think that's so cool to come from poetry. And I love how you focus on distilling the story in the right way and the power that makes. And I think that's so powerful and so cool. So I love it. Well, Kelsey, today we're going to talk about thought leadership, really what it is and focusing on some different aspects, and then really taking it and focusing on how to get the most out of it and really how to get value out of thought leadership. So to start things off, what is thought leadership? I know as it's like through time, it's kind of progressed and turned into different things. Like what is thought leadership today? What does that look like?
Personally, for me, I would say thought leadership, I think it first starts with having something to say, whether that's, for like your personal brand or for a brand at a company that you work for. And I think what makes it thought leadership content, like not only just having something to say and kind of like ranting on social media, which can be a part of it for a personal brand. But I think it's a combination of having something to say and then creating something of value from what you're trying to say. And that can, I think one of the important things to keep in mind is creating quality content. So I think a lot of times when people think of thought leadership, they think like, I'll just include like these string of thoughts in a blog and whatnot. And that can be like a great starting point. But I think you need to kind of like define a North Star of like, what do you want your perspective to be as like, again, personal brand or like a company brand, like what you stand for, what your unique perspective is, because there's a lot of people like shouting into the void. Yep. So I think those are two things that you need to have like a solid understanding of. And then when you start to create your content, whether it be like a podcast like this, for example, or, if you manage a blog, I think there's a lot of value in making sure that that content not only like inspires or persuades people to take a certain action, but also educates them about whatever that topic is, and entertains them. I mean, there's a lot of, there can be a lot of dry stuff out there. And I think being able to create that content of value, that gives like the listener, the reader, like tangible advice, whether it be about their careers or like about a certain industry. I personally think like a cherry on top of like creating that quality content is also having an aspect of entertainment in there.
Mm-hmm. So one question that comes to mind as you were saying that, for anyone like thinking about content in general, what's the difference between content and thought leadership? And how do you draw a line? And maybe my question is, when should you use each one? Because each one has its value, place, and time. But what's the difference and where do we use those?
That's a great question. I guess I'll use an example. Let's say you work for a company like the one I work for, and you sell a platform-based product. You could be putting out content about the product, which can be like product marketing. So like benefits of, using a smart home security system and like these features. And you can have articles that they can still be educational, but the focus is still on like that product. I guess more like bottom of the funnel type content. Whereas thought leadership would sit more at like the top of the funnel. So like more big picture ideas, unique perspectives. I think that can work really well when you pick like a certain person from that company to speak, to share their perspectives. For example, we have a podcast called Inside Insights, and our host, Ryan, is the president of our company. And, while a podcast is creating content, there's also aspects of like how he communicates things and the topics that he wants to cover. It's like the combination of getting across those like tangible bits of information, advice, educational material with someone's unique perspective, like a perspective that's genuine to them. I think that's what makes thought leadership content. But again, thought leadership content can be anything, I think, more top of the funnel, big picture. Whereas content, I think it flows throughout the whole funnel because it kind of depends like what you're trying to communicate at the time.
I love that. I think that's a great differentiation. I love how you think about it as in terms of the stage of the buyer's journey and the funnel, to say, okay, this is really early on, educational, it's outward focused, whereas it switches into content as it's more about us and it's more about our product and our offering. And I love how you kind of flow with that. I think that's a really cool definition of it.
Yeah, thank you.
So now that we've got like a good definition of thought leadership, and you say, okay, yeah, we gotta invest in this. It's super powerful. It's important. And you create some really good material. It's amazing. Knock it out of the park. How do we get the full benefits out of that material that we've created from thought leadership?
That's the challenge that I really like and kind of brings it back to my talking point earlier of how I got into marketing. So I think, in today's world, we always hear how we're moving so fast and no one has time for anything. So I think something really important to think about when you're creating thought leadership content is how to repurpose it, because you could create like a fabulous guide or ebook that's several pages long and it could truly be fantastic, no edits. But unfortunately, the reality is not everyone's going to read it. So in order for you to get your content out there and get that unique perspective out there to your audience, you have to find the right ways to cut up that main piece of content and repurpose it. And you have so many options as far as where that content can go. So a large part of that process is figuring out what works for you and for your content, whether you're a company or personal brand, whatever it is. And sometimes you can find ways that work for you. For example, for our podcast, we used to kind of bank on video clips on LinkedIn, and they performed really well. And it was just kind of, for us, once we saw that worked, it was like a no-brainer. Every episode we create, we are going to create a video clip and it's going to do great. And that worked for a significant amount of time. But then it didn't work. And we just noticed that it simply, the posts were just not getting as many impressions or as much engagement as they used to. So I think an important thing to note is not only do you have to, one, keep in mind that when you're creating thought leadership content, long form, thought leadership content, that you should be thinking of how you're going to repurpose that content. And secondly, once you, play around, whether it's video clips, you can do like pull quotes, you can, I'm just using LinkedIn example. You can use this like slide posts to create more bite-sized pieces of content, but, fit a little more in there. So then two, you figure out what works for you. But then I think a third important factor to keep in mind is to stay on top of it, because like that example I shared, something could work brilliantly for your content and where you're putting it, but things can change. And for us, the LinkedIn algorithm changed, and we have to pivot and find another way of what works. And, like I mentioned before, it's not like you're without options. There's so many platforms, channels to put that content into, whether it be social media. And even recently for us, because, the LinkedIn videos, sadly, weren't doing as well, we recently switched to YouTube Shorts to create similar content on a platform that is working. So I think those are three repurposing factors to keep in mind when creating thought leadership content. And I think it's just a great way to, again, get your thought leadership content out there. And, your audience, if it resonates with them, then they can click through and they can get the bigger piece of content. But it's a great way to hook your audience in, to get them there in the first place, because, again, it's like attention spans. I think today, unless they're already, a thrilled subscriber to your blog or, whatever it may be, chances are they're not going to be, running to read an ebook. So if you can help get them there by giving them like a preview in shorter form versions of that content, I think that's really a key thing to do today.
I love that. I love that whole framework and the conversation today about building thought leadership that's meaningful and what that looks like, how that's different from content, how to repurpose that content, provide value in shorter snippets. I also love your points about retest, rework, algorithms change, people's habits change, industries change. Like, just because you found a winning formula doesn't mean you shouldn't be figuring out what the next winning formula is going to be, because the one that you're using today has a timeline. And as long as you're, only putting all your eggs in that basket, eventually that's going to harm you and all of that. So love the content, love the conversation, loved everything about it. Kelsey, if anyone wants to reach out and connect with you online, where can they find you?
Yep. You can find me right on LinkedIn, Kelsey Sullivan. And if you want to check out our content and just subscribe to our podcast, we're called Inside Insights. And it's, more specifically for the market research industry. But if you're keen to know more about that testing and seeing what works and what doesn't, that's the subject matter we talk about there.
I love it. I love it. And we'll link to everything in the show notes below. Kelsey, again, thanks for the time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Thank you for listening to the Content Amplified podcast. Please subscribe and leave us a review. And for additional ways to get more out of your content, visit our website at getmasset.com. That's getmasset.com. And tune in next time to the Content Amplified podcast.